the soft hum of the air conditioner. That was the first thing Naomi Reeves heard after 34 days of absolute silence. Her eyes snapped open, her heart pounding against her ribs like a terrified bird. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But no, there it was again. The mechanical whirring sound coming from the corner of the bedroom, a sound so ordinary that most people would never notice it. But to Naomi, it was as shocking as a symphony orchestra materializing in her bedroom. She lay perfectly still, her auburn hair splayed across the pillow, green eyes wide with disbelief. Her mind raced back to that terrible day 5 weeks ago, the screeching tires, the deafening impact. Then, nothing. Complete and utter silence had followed. She had awakened in the hospital with no visible injuries aside from a few cuts and bruises. But the world around her had gone quiet, terrifyingly quiet. "There's no physical damage to your auditory structures that we can detect," Dr. Eleanor Murray had explained, her lips moving carefully so Naomi could read them. The specialist had sent her for brain scans and neurological tests, but they all came back normal. Sometimes trauma affects the body in mysterious ways. The mind protects itself. Naomi remembered how the doctor's face had softened with compassion as she'd typed on her tablet. "I've seen a handful of cases like yours in my career. Most don't regain their hearing, and the few who do usually take years, with recovery coming gradually, if at all." Yet here she was, just over a month later, hearing the air conditioner. Naomi carefully pushed herself up, sitting on the edge of the bed, afraid that any sudden movement might take this miracle away from her. The hardwood floor felt cool beneath her bare feet as she listened intently. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 6:27 in the morning. Sebastian would be in the shower about now. As if on cue, she heard it, the sound of running water from their ensuite bathroom. Tears welled in her eyes. After weeks of silence, even the simple sound of water was beautiful. She thought of waking Sebastian immediately, but decided to wait until he was done. Wouldn't it be wonderful to surprise him when he came out? To tell him she could hear again? She imagined his face lighting up with joy, imagined his arms wrapping around her in celebration. The water stopped. Naomi's heart fluttered with anticipation. She was about to stand when another sound froze her in place. A ringtone, Sebastian's phone. Then came his voice, clear as day. "Hey, beautiful." Naomi frowned slightly. That wasn't how Sebastian normally answered his phone. His voice sounded different too. Softer, more intimate. "No, I'm in the bathroom. She's still asleep. Even if she wasn't, she can't hear anything anyway." The words hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The world tilted sideways as her husband's voice continued. "I miss you too, baby. Last night was amazing. I know. Just a little longer, okay? I'm working on it." Naomi's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Silently, she slipped back under the covers, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain Sebastian would hear it when he came out. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe evenly as she heard the bathroom door open. "Yeah, I can talk. She won't wake up for another hour," Sebastian said, his voice now closer. Naomi could picture him, probably standing by the dresser, getting dressed for work. "The business meeting went well. I closed the Henderson account." There was a pause, and then Sebastian laughed, a low, intimate chuckle that Naomi had once loved, but now made her stomach churn. "Dinner on Friday sounds perfect. I'll tell her I have a late meeting." Another pause. Naomi felt sick. "I know, Layla. It's complicated right now, but I promise, we'll figure it out." Layla. The name burned into Naomi's consciousness. Layla Nichols. She had to be the 20-something woman Sebastian had introduced at the company Christmas party 6 months ago. His new assistant. Naomi remembered thinking how young and pretty she was, with her perfect skin and bright smile. At the time, she'd felt a small twinge of insecurity, but had dismissed it. She trusted Sebastian. What a fool she'd been. "I should be done with this conference call by 3, Sebastian continued, his voice moving around the room as he dressed. "I can meet you at the usual place after." The usual place. How long had this been going on? I've got to go now, baby. Love you too. Naomi heard the soft beep of the call ending, followed by the sounds of Sebastian moving around the bedroom. She felt him approach the bed, then the light pressure of his lips on her forehead through the comforter. See you tonight, he whispered, clearly believing she couldn't hear him. The front door opened and closed, and then came the sound of his car starting in the driveway. Only then did Naomi open her eyes, tears streaming down her face. What should have been the happiest morning of her life had transformed into a waking nightmare. Her hearing had returned, only to shatter her heart into 1,000 pieces. She lay there for hours, replaying Sebastian's conversation in her mind. The casual way he'd referred to her disability, the tenderness in his voice when speaking to Layla, a tenderness she hadn't heard directed at her in years. When had they grown so far apart? When had he stopped loving her? Or had he ever truly loved her at all? Around noon, Naomi finally dragged herself out of bed. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her throat raw. She walked to the kitchen in a daze, each familiar sound now a strange new torture. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the distant sound of a lawnmower from the neighbor's yard. She made coffee, savoring the sound of the beans grinding, the water heating, the final drip. She'd missed these everyday sounds desperately during her weeks of silence. Now they felt like cruel reminders of how quickly joy could turn to ashes. As she sat at the kitchen island, staring into her coffee, Naomi's mind raced. What should she do? Confront Sebastian immediately? File for divorce? Pretend she still couldn't hear and spy on him? The last option sent a chill through her. It felt manipulative, underhanded, not like her at all. And yet, Sebastian had been acting strangely even before her accident, working late more often, weekend business trips that seemed to pop up suddenly, text messages that made him smile secretively. She'd asked him once if everything was okay, and he'd kissed her forehead, just like this morning, and said, "Everything's perfect, Nay," the nickname he hadn't used in months. Her phone buzzed with a text. Naomi picked it up to see a message from Jasmine, her mother-in-law. "How are you feeling today, sweetie? Harold and I are thinking of you." Naomi's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Jasmine and Harold had been nothing but supportive since the accident. They visited weekly, learned basic sign language alongside Sebastian, and called or texted daily. They treated her like the daughter they never had. What would they think if they knew what their son was doing? She typed back, "Having a rough day, but managing." It wasn't a lie. Another text came almost immediately. "We love you, dear. This too shall pass." Naomi set the phone down, her resolve hardening. She needed to think, to plan. Sebastian believed he had the perfect cover for his affair, a wife who couldn't hear his phone calls or detect his lies. He'd grown careless, comfortable. How many times had he spoken to Layla right in front of her since the accident? The realization made her blood boil. He wasn't just betraying their marriage. He was using her disability as a tool for his infidelity. The cruelty of it stole her breath. By the time evening approached, Naomi had made her decision. She wouldn't confront Sebastian yet. She would use her unexpected advantage to discover the full extent of his betrayal first. For how long? He wasn't sure. But something told her she needed to be strategic, to gather information before making her next move. When she heard his key in the lock at 7:30, Naomi was sitting on the sofa, a book open in her lap, as she had done every evening since returning home from the hospital. She had showered, applied light makeup to hide the evidence of her tears, and carefully arranged her features into the neutral expression she'd worn for weeks. "Hey," Sebastian said as he entered, setting his briefcase down. He spoke louder than necessary, a habit he'd developed when speaking to her after the accident. Naomi looked up and smiled, gesturing to her tablet on the coffee table. Their new routine. She spoke. He typed his responses for her to read. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Sebastian picked up the tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Busy. Landed a new client. That's wonderful, she replied, watching his face for any sign of guilt, any tell that might betray him. There was nothing. His blue eyes met hers calmly, his handsome face revealing nothing but mild fatigue. When had he become such a good liar? Or had he always been one, and she just never noticed? Sebastian's phone chimed with a text. He glanced at it. A flicker of something. Anticipation? Desire? Crossing his features before he quickly composed himself. He typed something back rapidly, then returned the phone to his pocket. Work? Naomi asked innocently. He nodded, typing, Henderson account. Lots of details to iron out. The lies slid from his fingers so easily. Naomi felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This man, whom she had loved for 12 years, had become a stranger to her. No, worse than a stranger. An enemy wearing the face of her beloved. I'm going to make dinner, she said, rising from the couch. Pasta okay? Sebastian typed his agreement and settled on the sofa, pulling out his phone again. As Naomi moved to the kitchen, she heard him begin to type, the soft tapping of his thumbs against the screen, an intimate percussion to the soundtrack of her disintegrating marriage. That night, lying beside Sebastian in bed, listening to his deep, even breathing, Naomi stared at the ceiling. The soft glow of the moon filtered through the curtains, casting shadows across the room. Outside, a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating the walls before fading away. All these sounds, all these sensations she had missed so desperately, now surrounded her again. But instead of joy, they brought only pain and uncertainty. The sound of Sebastian's breathing beside her, once a comfort that lulled her to sleep, now felt like the ticking of a time bomb. As she finally drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized in Naomi's mind. This was not the end of her story. This was just the beginning of something new, something she never expected, something that would require all her strength to face. The silence had been broken, and with it, everything else was about to break too. Naomi had always been an early riser, but the past week had transformed her morning routine into something entirely different. Each day, she awoke before Sebastian, her body tense with anticipation, listening, waiting. The sounds of their home, the coffee maker gurgling downstairs, birds chirping outside their bedroom window, Sebastian's soft snoring. All of it still felt surreal after her weeks of silence. She lay perfectly still beside him now, counting his breaths, studying the familiar contours of his face. In sleep, Sebastian looked younger, more like the man she had fallen in love with 13 years ago when they'd met at a charity auction. Back then, his smile had lit up something inside her, and his dedication to his fledgling career had impressed her. When had that ambitious young man transformed into this deceptive stranger? Sebastian's phone vibrated on the nightstand. His eyes fluttered open, and he reached for it with practiced ease, a small smile forming on his lips as he read the screen. Another message from her, no doubt. Layla. Even thinking the name made Naomi's stomach clench. "Morning," she said, watching as Sebastian startled slightly, guilty eyes darting to her face before he schooled his features into a neutral expression. He reached for his tablet, typing, "Good morning. Sleep well?" The caring husband, the concerned partner. What a performance. "Yes," she lied, sitting up. "I'm going to shower." In the bathroom, Naomi turned on the water, letting the sound wash over her. She'd developed a new appreciation for everyday noises, the squeak of the faucet, the rush of water hitting tile, the soft thud of the shampoo bottle when she set it down. But these small pleasures were overshadowed by the weight of her discovery and the daily performance she now gave. For 7 days, she had maintained her deception. 7 days of watching Sebastian text his lover right in front of her. 7 days of him taking calls in the same room, speaking in that intimate tone reserved for Layla while his wife sat supposedly deaf beside him. 7 days of gathering information, pieces of a puzzle she never wanted to complete, but now couldn't stop assembling. She knew their usual meeting place was a hotel downtown. She knew Sebastian had told Layla he would leave Naomi soon. "Just need to get some things in order first," he'd said during a call yesterday, while Naomi pretended to be engrossed in a book. What things needed ordering? Their finances? The thought sent a chill through her. When Naomi emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, Sebastian was dressed for work, keys in hand. "Early meeting," he said aloud, then caught himself and typed it on the tablet instead. Naomi nodded, maintaining her facade. "Have a good day." He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture that held none of the warmth it once did, and left. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a gavel falling, pronouncing judgment on their marriage. Once alone, Naomi dropped the act, her shoulders sagging with the relief of not having to pretend. She dressed slowly, mentally preparing for what she needed to do next. Yesterday, while Sebastian was at work, meeting Layla, she now knew, Naomi had made a critical discovery. Sebastian had been careless, leaving his laptop at home, password protected, but with his password manager still logged in. She'd found emails discussing a new business entity he'd established 3 weeks ago, shortly after her accident. Convenient timing. Now, she booted up her own laptop and began searching for information on divorce attorneys. The thought made her physically ill, but she forced herself to continue. She had been naive once. She wouldn't make that mistake again. By noon, Naomi had compiled a list of highly recommended divorce lawyers in the area. One name stood out: Stella Lawson, described in review after review as tenacious, brilliant, and the attorney you want when the gloves come off. Naomi made an appointment for the following day during Sebastian's standing lunch meeting with a client. Another fiction, she now realized. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "Dropping by with some of that soup you like from Martelli's. Be there in 15. Hope that's okay." A wave of emotion washed over Naomi. Sebastian's mother had been so supportive since the accident, calling or visiting nearly every day. Jasmine and Harold treated her like a daughter, not just a daughter-in-law. The thought of losing them in the aftermath of a divorce caused a physical ache in her chest. But more painful was the question that had haunted her all week. Should she tell them what their son was doing? Did they deserve to know the truth about Sebastian? Or would that just cause unnecessary pain to two people who had shown her nothing but kindness? When Jasmine arrived, Naomi greeted her with a hug, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume, a light floral fragrance that always reminded Naomi of spring. "You look tired, sweetheart," Jasmine said, studying Naomi's face with concern. Then, remembering Naomi's supposed condition, she immediately pulled out her phone and typed the same message. The sight of this thoughtful gesture, one of many Jasmine had incorporated into their interactions since the accident, nearly broke Naomi. She considered telling her right then, confessing everything, her returned hearing, Sebastian's betrayal, all of it. Instead, she smiled and spoke. "Just not sleeping well. Thank you for the soup." They sat at the kitchen island, Jasmine typing updates about family and friends, while Naomi nodded and responded verbally. This new mode of communication had become second nature over the past month. "Harold and I were thinking," Jasmine typed, "maybe you'd like to come stay with us for a weekend. Change of scenery might do you good." Naomi's throat tightened. "That sounds nice. Let me check with Sebastian." "Seat." At the mention of her son, something flickered across Jasmine's face. So brief, Naomi almost missed it. Concern? Discomfort? Before she could analyze it, Jasmine's expression returned to its usual warmth. "Of course," Jasmine typed. "Just let us know." After lunch, as Jasmine prepared to leave, she hugged Naomi tightly, longer than usual. When they pulled apart, Jasmine's eyes held a strange intensity. "You know Harold and I love you very much," she said aloud, maintaining eye contact before typing the same message as if on autopilot. "I love you both too," Naomi replied, a chill running down her spine. Did Jasmine suspect something? Had she noticed a change in Sebastian? After Jasmine left, Naomi sat alone at the kitchen table, turning their interaction over in her mind. Something had felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on exactly what. Maybe she was just being paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were none. Her world had been turned upside down. It was natural to question everything now. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sebastian. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." Naomi stared at the message, anger bubbling up inside her. The casual lie, delivered without a second thought, felt like salt in an open wound. She typed back a single word, "Okay." Then, making a decision, she grabbed her purse and keys. She needed to get out of the house, away from the memories and lies that seemed to seep from the very walls. Naomi drove aimlessly at first, radio playing softly in the background, another simple pleasure rediscovered. After 30 minutes, she found herself parking outside the public library, a fitting refuge. During her weeks of silence, books had been her primary escape, a world where her disability didn't matter. Now, surrounded by the hushed sounds of pages turning and soft conversations, she felt a strange sense of peace for the first time in days. She wandered the aisles, running her fingers along the spines of books, listening to the soft footfalls of other patrons, the occasional cough, the distant sound of a children's story hour somewhere in the building. These ambient noises, once taken for granted, now felt precious. Naomi selected a book on financial independence after divorce and found a quiet corner to read. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just months ago, she'd been happily married, believing she had security and partnership for life. Now she was researching how to disentangle her finances from the man who was plotting behind her back. As she read, a conversation at a nearby table caught her attention. "I just don't understand how he could do that," a woman whispered, her voice tight with emotion. 15 years of marriage, and he throws it away for someone he barely knows. "Men are idiots," her companion replied, "but you're better off without him. Trust me." Naomi couldn't help but listen, finding eerie parallels to her own situation. The first woman continued, "The worst part is, everyone knew but me. I was the last to find out." The words sent a chill through Naomi. Was that true in her case too? Had others seen signs of Sebastian's infidelity that she had missed? Had she been blind, or simply trusting? By the time Naomi returned home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The house was dark and empty, exactly as she expected. Sebastian was with her, of course. Layla, the young, unbroken woman who had captured her husband's attention while Naomi struggled through the darkest period of her life. She moved through the quiet rooms, turning on lights, trying to dispel the shadows that seemed to gather in the corners. This house, once her sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for Sebastian's elaborate deception. In their home office, Naomi sat at Sebastian's desk, and after a moment's hesitation, opened his laptop again. He'd been careless lately, confident in her disability, often leaving his computer unlocked or his password manager active. Tonight was no exception. She navigated to his email, searching for any information about the new business entity he'd created. There, in an exchange with his attorney, she found what she was looking for: confirmation that Sebastian had established a separate LLC solely in his name. The timing lined up perfectly with her accident. While she was in the hospital, struggling to come to terms with her sudden deafness, her husband had been laying the groundwork to leave her. Another email caught her eye: a receipt for a diamond bracelet from an upscale jeweler downtown. $2,300. A gift for Layla, no doubt. The purchase date was just 3 days after Naomi's accident. She closed the laptop, feeling physically ill. How had she missed the signs? Had Sebastian always been this person? Or had he changed? And if he had changed, when had it happened? Why? Naomi wandered into the kitchen, sudden hunger gnawing at her despite her emotional turmoil. She opened the refrigerator, staring blankly at its contents. when a sound at the front door made her freeze. Keys jingling, the door opening. Sebastian, home earlier than expected. She quickly shut the refrigerator and moved to the living room, picking up a book from the coffee table and sitting on the sofa. By the time Sebastian entered, she had composed her features into a neutral expression, the same mask she'd worn all week. "You're up," he said. Then, catching himself, reached for his phone to type the message. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, watching him carefully. His hair was slightly mussed, his collar askew. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to him, noticeable even from across the room. Sebastian typed, "You okay?" The concern in his eyes seemed genuine, and for a moment, Naomi almost believed he cared. But then she remembered the emails, the phone calls, the lies. This was just another performance. "Fine," she said. "Just restless." He nodded, typing, "Going to shower, then bed. Don't stay up too late." Naomi watched him climb the stairs, listening to the sound of his footsteps above her, the shower starting. She remained on the sofa long after he had gone to bed, her mind racing with questions and plans. Tomorrow she would meet with Stella Lawson. Tomorrow she would begin the process of reclaiming her life from the man who had so callously discarded their vows. But tonight, in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, Naomi allowed herself to mourn the marriage she had believed in, the love she had trusted, and the future she had planned. Outside, a light rain began to fall, droplets tapping against the windows like gentle fingers. Naomi closed her eyes, focusing on the sound. Another gift returned to her, another simple pleasure to catalog and cherish. The rain intensified, drumming steadily now, washing away the day. Naomi imagined it cleansing her too, preparing her for what lay ahead. There would be pain, certainly, confrontation, loss, but beyond that, something else waited, something she couldn't yet name but could sense, like distant thunder on the horizon. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now, Naomi listened to the rain and allowed herself to feel everything, the anger, the betrayal, the grief, and underneath it all, a growing sense of resolve. Sebastian had underestimated her. That was his mistake. It would not be her last advantage. The offices of Lawson Legal occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise. Naomi sat in a modern leather chair, a cup of herbal tea cooling on the side table beside her, as she watched Stella Lawson review the documents she'd brought. The attorney's office was tastefully decorated in shades of gray and blue, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. "Let me make sure I understand the situation correctly," Stella said, her dark eyes sharp and focused as she looked up from the papers. "You lost your hearing in an accident approximately 5 weeks ago. The doctors couldn't find a physical cause, suggesting it was psychosomatic. Then, 1 week ago, your hearing suddenly returned. But instead of sharing this miraculous recovery with your husband, you discovered he's having an affair and possibly attempting to hide assets." Naomi nodded, clutching her purse in her lap. "That's correct." Stella leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "And you're certain about the asset transfer? You've seen clear evidence?" "I found emails discussing the creation of a new LLC solely in his name, dated right after my accident. And yesterday," Naomi swallowed hard, "yesterday I overheard him on the phone with his girlfriend, saying he needed to get things in order before leaving me." "I see." Stella tapped her pen against her notepad. "Mrs. Reeves, I want to be very clear about something. What you're doing, pretending to still be deaf, it's unusual but not illegal. However, if this goes to court, opposing counsel could try to paint you in a negative light for the deception." "I understand." Naomi met Stella's gaze steadily. "But Sebastian is using my supposed disability to hide his affair and plot financial maneuvers behind my back. I'm just trying to protect myself." Stella's expression softened slightly. "I'm not judging you, Mrs. Reeves. I've seen enough divorces to know that people rarely behave their best during them. I'm simply preparing you for what might come." She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Now, regarding the asset transfer, if your husband is attempting to hide marital assets, that's something the court takes very seriously. I'm going to need you to gather as much documentation as you can without raising suspicion. I've already started, Naomi replied, reaching into her purse to pull out a USB drive. I've made copies of the emails I found and taken screenshots of his text conversations with Layla. Stella raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. That's good, but we need more. Bank statements, property deeds, investment accounts, anything that shows what you owned together before this new company was formed. And, if possible, any documentation about the new LLC. For the next hour, they developed a strategy. Stella explained the divorce process in methodical detail, outlining timelines, potential pitfalls, and various scenarios. Naomi listened intently, taking notes, asking questions. It felt surreal to be having this conversation, planning the dismantling of the life she'd built with Sebastian. But with each passing minute, her resolve strengthened. One last thing, Stella said, as their meeting drew to a close. You mentioned your in-laws. Do they know about any of this? Naomi shook her head. No, at least, I don't think so. They've been wonderful to me, especially since the accident. I'm afraid of losing them when all this comes out. It's a valid concern, Stella acknowledged. Family dynamics can be complicated in these situations, but don't make assumptions about how they'll react. People can surprise you. As Naomi drove home, Stella's words echoed in her mind. People can surprise you. Hadn't Sebastian proven that already? The man she thought she knew, the marriage she believed was solid, all of it had been upended in the span of a week. She stopped at a red light, watching pedestrians cross the street in front of her. A young couple walked hand in hand, leaning into each other, laughing at some private joke. Naomi felt a pang of something, not quite jealousy, not quite nostalgia, but a complicated mix of both. Had she and Sebastian ever been like that? Had it all been an illusion from the start? The light turned green, and Naomi continued home, her mind replaying moments from their 12 years together. Their first date at the Italian restaurant downtown, where Sebastian had charmed her with stories of his childhood in Maine. The weekend trip to the mountains where he'd proposed, down on one knee beside a waterfall. Their wedding day, when he'd whispered forever against her lips after their first kiss as husband and wife. Had he meant it then? Had there been a time when Sebastian truly loved her, before something changed? Or had he always been capable of this level of deception, just waiting for the right opportunity? When Naomi arrived home, the house was empty, exactly as expected. Sebastian had texted earlier about another late meeting. She moved through the quiet rooms, seeing everything with new eyes. The photographs on the walls chronicling their life together, the furniture they'd chosen as a couple, the small mementos from trips they'd taken. Soon, all of this would be divided, categorized, separated. The thought was both devastating and strangely liberating. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of wine and pulled out her phone, scrolling to Jasmine's number. After a moment's hesitation, she texted, "Would love to take you up on that weekend visit. Is this Saturday okay?" The response came almost immediately. "Wonderful. We'd be delighted. I'll make up the guest room. Harold is already planning to grill those steaks you like." Naomi smiled sadly at the message. She treasured her relationship with Sebastian's parents and dreaded the thought of losing them. But Stella was right. She shouldn't make assumptions about how they would react when everything came to light. Her phone buzzed again with another text from Jasmine. "And don't worry about Sebastian. We know he's busy with work these days." Something about the phrasing caught Naomi's attention. There was a subtle emphasis on the word work that seemed off, almost sarcastic. Was she reading too much into it? Projecting her own knowledge onto an innocent message? Before she could analyze it further, she heard Sebastian's key in the front door. She quickly set down her wine glass and picked up a magazine from the counter, pretending to be engrossed in an article as he entered. "Hey!" Sebastian called out, then caught himself and typed a greeting on his phone instead. "Hi, Naomi replied, looking up with a practiced smile. Good day? He nodded. Typing? Productive. You? Fine. I was thinking of visiting your parents this weekend. They invited me to stay overnight Saturday. Is that okay? Sebastian's expression flickered. Relief? Anticipation? Before settling back into casual neutrality. He typed, Of course. I have some work to catch up on anyway. I bet you do, Naomi thought bitterly. A weekend without his deaf wife would give Sebastian plenty of uninterrupted time with Layla. Great, she said aloud. I'll let them know. That night, as they prepared for bed in their usual silence, Naomi studied Sebastian covertly. He moved around their bedroom with casual familiarity, unaware of her scrutiny, checking his phone frequently, no doubt texting Layla. The disconnect between this mundane domestic scene and the reality of their situation struck Naomi as almost absurd. Here they were, going through the motions of married life, while underneath, everything had already collapsed. Sebastian slid into bed beside her, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. He reached over to squeeze her hand, a gesture that once would have comforted her, but now felt hollow, before turning off his bedside lamp. Good night, he said, loud enough for a deaf person to potentially read his lips in the dim room. Good night, she replied, turning away from him. In the darkness, Naomi listened to Sebastian's breathing gradually slow and deepen as he fell asleep. Beside her lay a stranger wearing her husband's face, occupying the space in their bed where love had once lived. The intimacy of this moment, sharing a bed with the person plotting to leave her, felt suffocating. When she was certain Sebastian was deeply asleep, Naomi carefully slipped out of bed. She moved silently through the darkened house to the home office, where she booted up her laptop. Following Stella's instructions, she began documenting their financial records, taking screenshots of account balances, making notes of significant assets. As she worked, the magnitude of what was happening hit her anew. This methodical dismantling of their shared life felt both clinical and deeply personal. Each document represented not just money or property, but memories, plans, promises. The vacation fund they'd been building for a trip to Greece. The investment account they'd started with an eye toward early retirement. The joint checking account where their first paychecks as a married couple had been deposited. All of it soon to be divided, like drawing lines through their history together. By the time Naomi returned to bed, it was nearly 3 a.m. Sebastian hadn't moved, his breathing still deep and regular. She slid beneath the covers, careful not to wake him, and stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding her despite her exhaustion. In the quiet darkness, a new emotion began to surface alongside the hurt and betrayal. Anger. Not the hot, impulsive kind that flares and fades, but something deeper and more sustained. Sebastian hadn't just betrayed their marriage. He'd calculated his exit during her most vulnerable moment. He'd seen her disability not as something to support her through, but as an opportunity to exploit. What kind of person did that? The question lingered as Naomi finally drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams filled with fragments of conversations she was never meant to hear. Saturday morning arrived with the soft golden light of early autumn filtering through the curtains. Naomi packed an overnight bag for her stay with Harold and Jasmine, carefully selecting comfortable clothes and the novel she'd been reading. Sebastian moved around the house with barely contained energy, his anticipation for his weekend of freedom evident in his quick movements and frequent glances at his phone. "I'll drive you," he typed when Naomi emerged with her bag. "No problem." "Course," he would offer, Naomi thought. "Probably wants to make sure I actually go." "That would be nice," she said aloud, maintaining her role in their elaborate charade. The drive to his parents' house took 45 minutes, winding through suburban neighborhoods before reaching the quiet, tree-lined street where Harold and Jasmine had lived for over 30 years. Sebastian kept the radio on, a pop station playing current hits, and occasionally typed messages on his phone at stoplights. Naomi pretended not to notice, gazing out the window instead, watching the landscape change from urban to suburban. When they arrived, Jasmine came out to greet them, enveloping Naomi in a warm embrace before turning to her son. Something in her expression changed subtly as she hugged Sebastian. A tightness around her eyes, a slight stiffness in her posture. If Sebastian noticed, he gave no indication. "I'll pick you up tomorrow evening," he typed to Naomi. "Have a good time." She nodded, watching as he returned to the car with obvious haste, barely waiting for her to retrieve her bag from the trunk before pulling away. Jasmine watched too, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Come inside, dear," she said, then quickly typed the same message on her phone. "Harold's excited to see you." Inside, the house was exactly as Naomi remembered from countless family dinners and holiday gatherings, warm, comfortable, filled with photographs and mementos from the Reeves family history. Harold greeted her in the living room, rising from his recliner with a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "There she is," he said, hugging her tightly before remembering to type the same greeting. As they settled in the living room with iced tea, Naomi found herself studying her in-laws carefully. Something felt different about this visit. There was an underlying tension, a carefulness in how they interacted with her that went beyond accommodation for her supposed deafness. "How have you been, really?" Jasmine typed, her gaze intent on Naomi's face. "Managing," Naomi replied truthfully. "Some days are harder than others." Harold and Jasmine exchanged a glance that Naomi couldn't quite interpret. Harold typed, "And Sebastian? Has he been supportive?" The directness of the question caught Naomi off guard. "He's adjusting," she said carefully. "We both are." Another glance between the older couple, this one laden with meaning. Jasmine's fingers hovered over her phone screen for a moment before she typed, "Naomi, dear, there's something we need to discuss." Naomi's heart rate accelerated. "What is it?" Jasmine looked at Harold, who nodded encouragingly. She turned back to Naomi and began typing a longer message, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she finished, she passed the phone to Naomi. The message read, "We've noticed Sebastian behaving strangely lately, canceling family dinners, being evasive when we ask about his work, always on his phone. Then last week, I saw something that concerned me deeply. I was having lunch downtown and saw Sebastian with a young woman. They were intimate, holding hands across the table. I didn't approach them, but I've been sick with worry ever since. We didn't know how to tell you, especially with everything you're going through already." Naomi read the message twice, her hands trembling slightly. They knew. All this time, she thought she was protecting them from the painful truth, but they had discovered it on their own. Relief and grief mingled inside her as she looked up to meet Jasmine's concerned gaze. In that moment, Naomi made a decision. These people had treated her like a daughter for 12 years. They deserved the truth. All of it. "I need to tell you something," she said, setting the phone down on the coffee table between them. Harold and Jasmine looked at her expectantly, their expressions a mixture of concern and confusion. "I can hear you," Naomi said quietly. "My hearing came back a week ago." The silence that followed Naomi's revelation was profound, weighted with shock and unspoken questions. Harold and Jasmine stared at her, perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter this fragile moment. "You can," Jasmine began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Here," Naomi finished, nodding. "Yes, it happened suddenly, last Monday morning." Harold leaned forward in his chair, his weathered hands clasped tightly together. That's wonderful news," he said, his voice catching. "But why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you tell Sebastian?" The pain that flashed across Naomi's face answered his question before she could speak. Understanding dawned in Jasmine's eyes, followed quickly by a deep sadness. "Oh, Naomi," she breathed. "What happened?" Naomi took a deep breath, steadying herself. "The morning my hearing returned, I was going to surprise Sebastian. He was in the shower, and I was waiting for him to come out. But then his phone rang, and I heard him answer it." She paused, swallowing past the lump in her throat. He was talking to a woman named Layla, his girlfriend. Harold closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. Layla Nichols, he said, the young woman from his office. Naomi nodded, not surprised that they had already pieced together the identity of the other woman. He spoke freely in front of me, thinking I couldn't hear. He's been doing it all week, talking to her on the phone, while I'm right there in the room, making plans, saying things. She trailed off, unable to repeat the hurtful words she'd overheard. Jasmine moved to sit beside Naomi on the sofa, taking her hand. "And you've been pretending you still can't hear all this time?" "Yes," Naomi admitted, feeling a wave of relief at finally sharing her burden. "At first, I was just in shock. Then I realized that if he thought I was still deaf, I could learn more about what he was planning. And he is planning something, Jasmine. He created a new company right after my accident, an LLC in his name only. I think he's trying to hide assets before leaving me." Harold's expression darkened. "That son of a—" He caught himself, glancing apologetically at the women. "Sorry, but I never thought Sebastian would stoop this low." "Neither did I," Naomi said quietly. "I've met with a divorce attorney. Her name is Stella Lawson, and she's helping me gather evidence of what he's doing." Jasmine squeezed Naomi's hand tightly. "We're so sorry, dear. We had no idea it had gone this far." She hesitated. "When I saw them together last week, I confronted Sebastian afterward, called him that evening and demanded to know what he was doing. He claimed she was just a colleague, that they were discussing business. And you didn't believe him," Naomi said. It wasn't a question. "No," Jasmine replied firmly. "I raised that boy. I know when he's lying." She exchanged a glance with Harold. "We've been trying to figure out how to tell you, especially with well, what we thought was your continued hearing loss." Harold cleared his throat. "Naomi, I want you to know something. Whatever happens between you and Sebastian, whatever you decide to do, you will always be our daughter. That doesn't change." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes at his words. This had been her greatest fear, losing the two people who had become her second parents. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means everything to me." "Now," Jasmine said, her voice taking on a practical tone that reminded Naomi of how she sounded when organizing family gatherings. "Tell us everything. What's your plan? How can we help?" For the next hour, Naomi explained everything. Her meetings with Stella, the evidence she'd gathered, the strategy they were developing. Harold and Jasmine listened intently, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions. There was no judgment in their eyes, only support and a simmering anger directed not at her, but at their son. "I still can't believe Sebastian would do this," Harold said when Naomi had finished. "Using your condition against you like that. It's unconscionable." "What hurts most," Naomi admitted, "is that he started seeing her before my accident. This isn't some reaction to my disability. He was already planning to leave." Jasmine's expression hardened. "I knew something was off with him these past few months. He's been distant, distracted. I should have seen this coming." "We all should have," Harold added gently. "But Naomi, don't blame yourself. This is on Sebastian, not you." As they talked, Naomi felt some of the crushing weight she'd been carrying begin to lift. Sharing her burden with Harold and Jasmine, knowing they believed her, supported her, gave her a strength she hadn't realized she was missing. "We need to be smart about this," Jasmine said eventually. "Sebastian can't know that we know, or that you can hear. Not until you're ready." Harold nodded in agreement. "We'll play along with the charade when he's around. But in the meantime, we'll help you gather whatever information you need." "Actually," Naomi said slowly, a new thought forming, "there might be something you can help with. Sebastian mentions business documents sometimes when he's talking to Layla. Papers that need to be signed, transfers that need to be completed. If you could somehow get him talking about his business dealings—" "Leave it to me," Harold said, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "I've been asking him about investment opportunities for months. He won't suspect anything if I press for details." As evening approached, the three of them moved to the kitchen, working together to prepare dinner. The familiar routine of chopping vegetables and setting the table brought a sense of normalcy that Naomi hadn't experienced in weeks. For a few precious hours, she allowed herself to exist in this bubble of support and understanding, temporarily setting aside the pain of betrayal. They ate on the back patio, the autumn air crisp but not uncomfortable. Harold grilled steaks to perfection, and Jasmine made her famous rosemary potatoes. They talked about everything except Sebastian, books Naomi had been reading, Harold's woodworking projects, Jasmine's volunteer work at the local animal shelter. It was a deliberate choice, Naomi knew, to give her this respite from the constant stress. Later, as they sat in the living room with cups of decaf coffee, Jasmine asked the question Naomi had been expecting. "What will you do when it's time to confront him?" Naomi stared into her cup, watching the light play across the dark liquid. "I'm not sure yet. Stella says timing is everything. We need to have all our evidence in place before I reveal that I can hear. Otherwise, Sebastian might be able to cover his tracks with the asset transfers." "And emotionally?" Harold prompted gently. "How are you preparing for that confrontation?" It was a good question, one Naomi had been avoiding. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to scream at him, make him feel all the pain he's caused me. Another part just wants this to be over as cleanly as possible." "You'll know what to do when the time comes," Jasmine assured her. "Trust your instincts. They've served you well so far." That night, in the Reeves' comfortable guest room, Naomi slept more soundly than she had in weeks. The knowledge that she wasn't alone in this fight brought a peace she desperately needed. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from the kitchen. Naomi showered and dressed, feeling strangely optimistic despite everything. As she descended the stairs, she could hear Harold and Jasmine talking in low voices in the kitchen. She paused on the landing, not intentionally eavesdropping, but caught by the serious tone of their conversation. "Never raised him to be this kind of man," Jasmine was saying, her voice tight with emotion. "I don't understand it, Harold." "People make choices," Harold replied heavily. "Bad ones sometimes. We can't take responsibility for that. But where did we go wrong? What did we miss?" "Jasmine, stop. This isn't about us. Sebastian is a grown man who's making terrible decisions. Our job now is to support Naomi." There was a brief silence. Then Jasmine said, "You're right, of course. It's just hard to accept that our son could be so cruel." Naomi's heart ached for them. In their own way, they were experiencing a profound loss too. The shattering of their image of their son. The realization that he wasn't the man they believed him to be. She waited a moment before continuing down the stairs, giving them time to compose themselves. "Good morning," she called as she entered the kitchen. The normality of the greeting a small pleasure after weeks of calibrating her speech for someone who supposedly couldn't hear her. "Morning, sweetheart," Jasmine replied, her smile genuine despite the sadness lingering in her eyes. "Hungry?" They ate breakfast together, planning the day ahead. Sebastian wouldn't be picking Naomi up until evening, giving them plenty of time to strategize. "I've been thinking," Harold said as he refilled their coffee cups. "Sebastian set up this new company using the family attorney, right? Charles Whitman?" Naomi nodded. "That's what the emails suggested. Charles and I play golf every month, have for 20 years. I could casually ask him about business structures, tax implications. Lawyer-client privilege only extends so far. He might let something slip. Would he do that?" Naomi asked, uncertain. "Breach confidentiality?" "Not explicitly," Harold clarified. "But Charles is terrible at hiding his reactions. If I mention certain scenarios, I'll be able to tell by his face if I'm on the right track. And more importantly, I can let him know that I'm aware something's happening with Sebastian's finances. That might make him more cautious about facilitating anything questionable." Jasmine nodded approvingly. "Good thinking, dear." After breakfast, they moved to Harold's study, where Naomi shared the documentation she'd been gathering. Harold, with his background in finance before retirement, quickly grasped the implications of what Sebastian appeared to be doing. "Classic attempt to shield assets," he muttered, examining the emails Naomi had forwarded to her own account. Not particularly sophisticated, but effective if no one's looking closely. Can he get away with it? Naomi asked. Not if we catch it in time, Harold assured her. Courts don't look kindly on this sort of manipulation, especially when there's clear evidence it began right after a spouse suffered a medical crisis. He looked up, his expression grim but determined. We won't let him do this to you, Naomi. By mid-afternoon, they had developed a comprehensive strategy. Harold would approach Charles Whitman and Sebastian's accountant, using his position as concerned father to gather information without raising alarms. Jasmine would encourage Sebastian to bring Layla to a family dinner, ostensibly to meet this colleague he's been working with so closely, a move designed to put pressure on the affair without revealing what they knew. And Naomi would continue her careful documentation of everything Sebastian said and did, building the case for when confrontation became inevitable. As the time for Sebastian's arrival approached, Naomi felt a curious mix of dread and strength. Returning to the house she shared with him meant resuming her exhausting charade, but she was no longer carrying her burden alone. Remember, Jasmine said as they stood on the front porch, waiting for Sebastian's car to appear, call us any time, day or night. If things get too difficult, you have a place here with us. I can't thank you both enough, Naomi replied, her voice thick with emotion. I was so afraid of losing you when this all came out. Not possible, Harold said firmly, squeezing her shoulder. Family is family, Naomi. Real family stands by each other. The sound of an approaching car drew their attention. Sebastian's silver sedan turned into the driveway, right on time. Naomi watched as he parked and got out, waving casually to his parents. There was no hint of guilt in his expression, no indication that he believed he was doing anything wrong. Ready? Harold murmured. Naomi took a deep breath, settling the mask of deafness back over her features. Ready. As Sebastian approached, Jasmine and Harold seamlessly shifted into their roles, typing messages on their phones instead of speaking directly to Naomi, maintaining the illusion that their daughter-in-law still lived in silence. The performance was flawless, so convincing that for a moment, even Naomi almost believed it. Sebastian hugged his parents briefly, then typed a message to Naomi. Ready to go? She nodded, embracing Jasmine and Harold one last time before picking up her overnight bag. As they walked to the car, Sebastian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, a small smile playing at his lips, the same smile Naomi had once found charming, but now recognized as a sign of his betrayal. In the car, driving away from the safety of her in-laws' home, Naomi gazed out the window, her mind already planning her next moves. Sebastian turned on the radio, classic rock this time, and began tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, completely at ease. He had no idea that the ground was shifting beneath him, that his carefully constructed deception was already crumbling. For the first time since her hearing had returned, Naomi felt something like hope. She wasn't alone anymore, and soon, very soon, Sebastian would discover just how badly he had underestimated her. 3 days after her weekend with Harold and Jasmine, Naomi sat at the kitchen island, a cup of tea growing cold beside her, as she listened to Sebastian's voice drifting from the home office. He was on another call with Layla, his tone intimate and conspiratorial, a voice Naomi once believed belonged only to her. The papers are ready, he was saying, unaware that every word reached his wife's ears with perfect clarity. Just need her signature on a few things. She never reads what she signs anyway. Naomi's fingers tightened around her mug. In the 10 days since her hearing had miraculously returned, she had documented dozens of conversations like this one, each more damning than the last. Sebastian and Layla's plan was crystallizing. Transfer the majority of assets to Sebastian's new company. Prepare the groundwork for a separation where Naomi would be left with minimal financial support, and begin their new life together without the burden of a wife Sebastian no longer wanted. What Sebastian didn't know was that Naomi had been building her own plan, piece by careful piece. Tomorrow, Sebastian continued, his voice dropping lower. I'll have her sign everything tomorrow. Tell her it's just routine paperwork for the insurance company. By the end of the week, everything will be transferred. Naomi glanced at her phone, where a text from Stella Lawson glowed on the screen. Documents ready. Can you come in at 2 p.m. today? Perfect timing. She typed back a quick confirmation, then set down her phone as Sebastian emerged from the office, still talking. I should go. She's in the kitchen, he said. Then laughed at something Layla said. I know, baby. She has no idea. Love you too. Naomi quickly picked up a magazine, pretending to be absorbed in an article as Sebastian entered the kitchen. He ended his call and walked to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of water with the casual confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. When he turned and saw her sitting there, he gave a small start, just enough to confirm he'd forgotten she was home. Hey, he said aloud, then caught himself and typed the greeting on his phone instead, sliding it across the counter to her. Hi, she replied, looking up with practiced neutrality. I'm meeting a friend for coffee this afternoon. Sebastian nodded, typing. Anyone I know? Just someone from my book club. Naomi lied smoothly. We're discussing the new Sarah Dessen novel. He nodded again, clearly uninterested, and typed, I have some papers for you to sign tomorrow. Insurance stuff. Nothing important? Nothing important. Just the documents that would strip her of financial security after 12 years of marriage. Naomi forced a smile and nodded, watching as Sebastian checked his watch, an expensive timepiece she'd given him for their 10th anniversary. I've got to run, he typed. Client meeting downtown. Client meeting. Another lie. According to the conversation she'd just overheard, he was meeting with the attorney handling his asset transfers. Their life together had become a complex choreography of deceptions, his deliberate, hers defensive. After Sebastian left, Naomi moved quickly. She showered and dressed with care, selecting a tailored navy dress and pearl earrings that had been a gift from Jasmine last Christmas. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman who stared back at her, composed, determined, eyes clear and focused. The shock and grief that had dominated her features in those first days after discovering Sebastian's betrayal had transformed into something else. Resolve. At exactly 2 o'clock, Naomi sat across from Stella Lawson in her downtown office, reviewing the documents the attorney had prepared. It's all here, Stella said, her manicured finger tapping a particularly dense paragraph of legal text. The petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences, the financial disclosure forms detailing all your marital assets, including those Sebastian is attempting to hide, and the temporary restraining order preventing him from transferring any assets once this is filed. Naomi nodded, scanning the documents. And this will stop him from moving forward with the transfers? It will, Stella confirmed. Once served, he won't be able to touch any marital assets without court approval. But timing is critical. You said he plans to have you sign documents tomorrow? Yes. He called them insurance papers. Stella's lips pressed into a thin line. Classic. Get the unsuspecting spouse to sign away their rights under the guise of routine paperwork. She leaned forward. Naomi, we need to file these before he can execute those transfers, which means you need to be ready for confrontation sooner rather than later. The word hung between them. Confrontation. The moment when the carefully maintained illusion would shatter, when Sebastian would discover that his wife had not only regained her hearing, but had been several steps ahead of him all along. I'm ready, Naomi said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I've spent enough time living this lie. Good, Stella replied, because we have one more piece to put into place. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, then set it on the desk between them. Harold and Jasmine Reeves are on their way. They called this morning, asking to be involved. Naomi felt a rush of emotion. Even knowing how supportive they'd been, this still touched her deeply. They want to be there when it happens? They insisted, Stella said with a small smile. Quite forcefully, in fact. Especially Jasmine. 2 hours later, Naomi sat in Stella's office with Harold and Jasmine, finalizing their strategy for what Harold had grimly dubbed Operation Wake Up Call. The atmosphere was somber but determined, like generals planning a difficult but necessary campaign. "Sunday dinner," Jasmine was saying. "We insist that Sebastian bring you over. Tell him we have an announcement to make." Her eyes, so like her son's, but warmer, more honest, met Naomi's. "We'll have Stella there. Everything will be in place." "What about Layla?" Naomi asked. "Sebastian will be suspicious if she's invited." "Let him be suspicious," Harold replied, his voice firm. "It's time for this to end, Naomi. You've gathered more than enough evidence. Stella's prepared all the necessary legal documents. There's no reason to prolong your suffering." Naomi nodded slowly. They were right. The charade had served its purpose, allowing her to protect herself financially and emotionally while she prepared for what came next. But maintaining it was taking a toll she wasn't sure how much longer she could bear. "Sunday then," she agreed. 3 days from now." As they drove back to the house, Harold insisting on taking her himself rather than having her call a rideshare, Naomi felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. The uncertainty that had plagued her since that first morning of returned hearing was fading, replaced by a clear path forward. It wouldn't be easy. It would likely be painful. But it would be honest. "You know," Harold said as they neared her neighborhood, "I've been thinking a lot about what happens after all this." Naomi turned to look at him, noting the deep lines that stress had etched into his face these past weeks. "What do you mean?" "After the divorce, after the dust settles," he clarified. "You're still young, Naomi. 36 is nothing. You have so much life ahead of you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I just want you to know that whatever you decide to do, wherever you decide to go, you'll never lose us. Jasmine and I, we're your family. That doesn't change." Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you both." Harold reached over and squeezed her hand briefly before returning his attention to the road. "You're stronger than you know," he said simply. The next 3 days passed in a haze of preparation and tension. Sebastian, oblivious to the storm gathering around him, continued his routine of poorly disguised lies and late-night phone calls to Layla. On Friday, he presented Naomi with the insurance papers, which she examined carefully before claiming she needed time to review them. Sebastian had looked momentarily panicked, but quickly recovered, telling her there was no rush, a statement belied by the anxious glances he kept throwing at the unsigned documents. On Saturday night, Naomi lay awake long after Sebastian had fallen asleep, listening to the sound of his breathing and wondering how they had reached this point. Once, she had loved this man with her whole heart. Once, she had believed he felt the same. Had it all been an illusion? Or had something real existed between them, only to wither away when she wasn't looking? The questions had no answers, at least none that would bring her peace. What mattered now was moving forward, reclaiming her life from the wreckage of broken vows and shattered trust. Sunday dawned bright and clear, autumn sunshine bathing their bedroom in golden light as Naomi rose early to prepare. She dressed with deliberate care, not for Sebastian, but for herself. A fitted emerald dress that brought out the green in her eyes, hair loose around her shoulders, minimal makeup. She wanted to face this day as herself, not hidden behind artifice. When Sebastian emerged from the shower, he seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly as he dressed. Naomi watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the nervous energy in his movements. "Remind me why your parents called this dinner again?" he asked, loud enough for her to read his lips, then immediately typed the same question. "They said they have news to share," Naomi replied. "Maybe they're planning a trip." Sebastian nodded absently, clearly unconcerned with his parents' fictitious announcement. "We should leave by 5, he typed, then added, "Don't forget those insurance papers. I can drop them off tomorrow on my way to work." "I won't forget," Naomi assured him, the irony of her words not lost on her. She wouldn't forget any of this. Not his betrayal, not her awakening, not the strength she had found in the aftermath. The day passed with excruciating slowness, each hour stretching endlessly as 5 o'clock approached. Sebastian spent most of it on his phone, presumably coordinating with Layla, while Naomi moved through the house, gathering the last pieces she would need: the recorded conversations, the screenshots of text messages, the emails detailing his financial machinations. At exactly 4:55, they got into Sebastian's car for the drive to his parents' home. The radio played softly between them, filling the silence with meaningless noise. Naomi gazed out the window, mentally rehearsing what she would say when the moment finally came. Harold and Jasmine's house looked exactly as it always did. Warm lights glowing in the windows, the familiar wreath on the front door, Harold's meticulously maintained garden lining the walkway. But as they approached, Naomi noticed an unfamiliar car parked in the driveway alongside Harold's sedan. "Who else is here?" Sebastian asked, frowning as he parked behind the unknown vehicle. His question was directed at the air, not at Naomi. A slip that revealed just how accustomed he had become to her supposed deafness. Naomi pretended not to notice, focusing instead on gathering her purse and the folder of documents she'd brought. Together, they walked to the front door, Sebastian still frowning slightly. Jasmine opened it before they could knock, her warm smile hiding the steel Naomi knew lay beneath. Come in," she said, hugging Naomi tightly before embracing her son with noticeably less enthusiasm. "Everyone's in the living room." "Everyone?" Sebastian echoed, his frown deepening. "Mom, what's going on?" "You'll see," Jasmine replied enigmatically, leading them down the hallway. The living room fell silent as they entered. Harold stood by the fireplace, his expression grave. Stella Lawson sat in an armchair, professional in a charcoal suit, a briefcase at her feet. And on the sofa, looking uncomfortable but determined, sat Charles Whitman, Sebastian's attorney. Sebastian stopped abruptly, his body tensing beside Naomi. "What is this?" he demanded, looking from face to face. "Dad? What's going on?" Harold met his son's gaze steadily. "Sit down, Sebastian." "Not until someone explains why my lawyer is in your living room," Sebastian snapped, his composure cracking. He turned to Charles. "What are you doing here?" Charles Whitman cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your father called me, Sebastian. After our conversation yesterday, I felt obligated to—" "I don't want to hear it," Sebastian interrupted, turning back to his parents. "Whatever this is, I'm not participating. Naomi, we're leaving." He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. "No," Naomi said clearly, standing her ground. "We're not." Sebastian froze, his grip on her arm slackening as he processed what he'd just heard. Slowly, he turned to face her, confusion and the first flickers of realization crossing his features. "What did you say?" he whispered. Naomi met his gaze directly, her voice steady and clear. "I said no, Sebastian. We're not leaving. We're going to sit down and discuss several things, including your relationship with Layla Nichols, your plans to transfer our marital assets into your new company, and your intention to leave me with nothing after 12 years of marriage." The color drained from Sebastian's face as her words registered. You can hear?" "Yes," Naomi confirmed, feeling a strange lightness as the truth finally emerged. "My hearing returned 10 days ago, just in time to hear you on the phone with your girlfriend, planning how to use my disability to your advantage." Sebastian staggered back a step, shock giving way to understanding, then to something like fear. "You've been pretending? This whole time? Like you've been pretending to be a faithful husband?" Jasmine interjected sharply. "Sit down, Sebastian. Now." For once in his life, Sebastian Reeves followed instructions without argument. He sank into a chair, his confident facade crumbling as he looked from face to face, finally comprehending that everyone in the room knew exactly what he had done. What followed was unlike any conversation Naomi had ever experienced. With Stella's calm guidance, they laid out everything. The affair that predated Naomi's accident, the financial manipulations that began immediately after, the cold calculation with which Sebastian had exploited what he believed was his wife's permanent disability. Charles Whitman, visibly uncomfortable, confirmed that he had advised against the asset transfers, but that Sebastian had insisted. Harold revealed the evidence he'd gathered from Sebastian's accountant, and Naomi, her voice growing stronger with each word, described what it had been like to hear her husband speak so callously about her, to plan her abandonment while pretending to care. Through it all, Sebastian sat in stunned silence, occasionally attempting weak denials that died on his lips as more evidence was presented. By the time Stella placed the divorce papers in front of him, he looked like a man who had aged a decade in a single hour. "You have a choice," Stella explained, her tone professional but not unkind. "You can sign these papers, agreeing to a fair division of assets and a clean break, or we can take this to court, where every detail of your behavior will become public record. Your business reputation, your standing in the community, all of it will be affected. Think carefully, Mr. Reeves." Sebastian stared at the documents, then at Naomi. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Why go through all this? Why not just confront me when you first heard me on the phone?" "Because you taught me something, Sebastian," Naomi replied quietly. "You taught me that sometimes people aren't who they pretend to be. Sometimes you need to protect yourself from the person who promised to protect you." A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the familiar space where Naomi had once celebrated holidays and anniversaries with the family she thought would always be hers. "What happens now?" Sebastian asked, defeat evident in his voice. "Now you sign those papers," Harold said firmly. "You acknowledge what you've done, and you begin the process of making it right. And Layla?" Sebastian's question came out small, almost childlike. "That's between you and her," Naomi said, surprised to find she meant it. Whatever happened in Sebastian's relationship with Layla no longer concerned her. She had her own future to build. Sebastian signed the papers without further protest, his signature uncharacteristically shaky. When he finished, he looked up at Naomi, something like regret crossing his features. "I did love you once," he said softly. "I want you to know that." Naomi studied the face of the man she had shared her life with, searching for any trace of the person she had believed him to be. "I believe you did," she replied. "But love isn't just a feeling, Sebastian. It's a choice you make every day. And somewhere along the way, you stopped choosing me." Later, after Sebastian had left, alone, hollow-eyed, barely resembling the confident man who had entered the house an hour before, Naomi sat in the kitchen with Harold, Jasmine, and Stella, a strange sense of peace settling over her. "It's done," Stella said, organizing the signed documents in her briefcase. "I'll file these first thing tomorrow. The financial freeze is already in effect. He won't be able to move any assets now." "Thank you," Naomi said, reaching across the table to squeeze the attorney's hand. "For everything." "You did the hard part," Stella replied with a smile. "I just provided the legal framework." She stood, gathering her things. "I'll be in touch tomorrow with next steps." After Stella left, the three remaining sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the confrontation slowly lifting. "I'm proud of you," Jasmine said finally, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from Naomi's face, a motherly gesture that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "You handled that with such grace." "I don't feel graceful," Naomi admitted. I don't even know. Relieved? Exhausted? Sad? All of that is normal," Harold assured her. "What you've been through, what you're still going through, it's a lot for anyone to process." Jasmine refilled their teacups, the familiar ritual bringing comfort. "What will you do now?" It was the question Naomi had been asking herself for days, with no clear answer. But sitting here, in this house that had always felt like a second home, something crystallized within her. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm going to write." "Write?" Harold echoed, curious. Naomi nodded, the idea taking shape as she spoke. During those weeks of silence, books were my lifeline. And then, when my hearing returned, words, overheard words, changed everything. She took a sip of her tea, organizing her thoughts. There's something powerful in that, isn't there? The stories we tell, the words we choose, how they can wound or heal. Jasmine smiled, understanding dawning in her eyes. You always did have a way with words, your letters, your journals. Even back when you and Sebastian were first dating, I remember thinking how beautifully you expressed yourself. I have a story to tell, Naomi said, feeling more certain with each word. Not just about betrayal, but about rediscovery, about finding strength you didn't know you had. I'd read that book, Harold said simply. 1 year later, Naomi stood in a small, independent bookstore downtown, hardly believing the scene before her. A line of people stretched from the signing table where she sat to the door and beyond, each person clutching a copy of When the Silence Broke, her debut novel that had, to everyone's surprise, including her own, become a national bestseller. The story wasn't exactly her own. She had changed names, details, settings, but the emotional core remained. A woman whose world is shattered by betrayal, who finds her voice again in the most unexpected way, who rebuilds her life from the broken pieces of what came before. Who should I make it out to? She asked the next person in line, a woman perhaps a few years older than herself. Margaret, the woman replied, and I just want to say thank you. Your book helped me leave my husband after 20 years of emotional abuse. I didn't think I could start over at 52, but here I am. Naomi looked up, truly seeing Margaret, the nervous smile, the determined set of her shoulders, the new beginnings evident in her eyes. It's never too late to find your voice, Naomi said, inscribing the book with those words before signing her name. As the signing continued, Naomi caught sight of Jasmine and Harold near the back of the store, beaming with pride. They had been her anchors throughout the past year, helping her find a small but charming apartment after the divorce was finalized, encouraging her writing when self-doubt crept in, reminding her that family wasn't always defined by marriage or blood. The advance from her book had provided financial stability, allowing Naomi to restart her design business on her own terms while working on her second novel. Sebastian, she had heard, had moved to another state with Layla, their relationship having survived the scandal, but not without cost. His business had suffered, his reputation tarnished by whispers that followed the divorce. Naomi found she could think of him now without pain. A chapter closed, a lesson learned. When the last book was signed and the store began to empty, Jasmine approached with a small gift bag. For you, she said, hugging Naomi tightly, a little celebration. Inside, Naomi found a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages crisp and empty, waiting to be filled. On the first page, Jasmine had written, "For your next chapter, whatever it may be, with love always, Mom and Dad." Tears pricked Naomi's eyes as she traced the words with her fingertip. "Thank you," she whispered, embracing them both. Later, as they sat in a nearby cafe celebrating with coffee and pastries, Naomi found herself reflecting on the strange, painful journey that had led her here. The accident that took her hearing, the morning it returned, bringing with it heartbreak and betrayal, the weeks of deception that followed, both Sebastian's and her own, the confrontation that finally broke the cycle of lies. All of it had shaped her, transformed her into someone stronger, wiser, more compassionate than she had been before. The silence had broken, yes, but so had the illusions she had lived with for so long. In their place grew something authentic, a life built on truth, creativity, and genuine connection. "Penny for your thoughts," Harold said, noticing her momentary abstraction. Naomi smiled, coming back to the present. "I was just thinking about silver linings," she replied. "How sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we're brave enough to keep moving forward. And are you?" Jasmine asked gently. Moving forward? Naomi looked around, at the bustling cafe, at the stack of her books on the table, at these two people who had chosen to love her through the darkest chapter of her life, and felt a deep, abiding certainty settle in her chest. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong, audible to everyone at the table and to herself most of all. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Outside, autumn leaves danced in the October breeze, golden and vibrant, letting go of their branches to embark on new journeys. Naomi watched them through the window, hearing the gentle rustle even from inside, one of countless everyday sounds she would never again take for granted. The world was full of noise, painful and beautiful, chaotic and harmonious, but now, finally, she was ready to listen to all of it, to add her own voice to the symphony, and to write whatever came next in her story. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.